Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. This information session is designed to update you on our progress and address your questions. We plan on answering as many questions as possible during the question and answer period. Updated information about Reclamation's implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law is always available at www.usbr.gov/BIL or Inflation Reduction Act at www.usbr.gov/inflation-reduction-act. You may find these links in the chat or they are linked from Reclamation's homepage. Also, feel free to submit your questions, comments about the bipartisan infrastructure law to usbr.bil@usbr.gov or Inflation Reduction Act at usbr.ir.act@usbr.gov, and we will work to address your questions. We also have a growing list of questions and answers available on the website as well. I hope that is a helpful resource. We are committed to transparency throughout this process and appreciate your support of this historic opportunity to improve our nation's water infrastructure. It's now my pleasure to introduce our Senior Advisor for Operations, Matt Masieri.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you also to our communications team, and thanks all of you for joining this stakeholder session on Reclamation's implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. I'm Matt Masieri in Reclamation's operations group here in the DC office. And this is, as Mary said, continuing in our series of quarterly updates that started in December 2021 on the BIL and now also the IRA. Bureau of Reclamation has an Inflation Reduction Act team that's on this call, as well as a bipartisan infrastructure law team that I co-lead together with Beth Hughes Brown from our budget office. But with those teams, we are a whole agency that is at work on implementing the historic investments of the BIL and the IRA. So we will introduce each other as we go through today's slide deck, and we'll be ready to take any questions at the end. With that, let's begin and move into the next slide. So today's slide deck is most of the same format, mostly as we have used in the previous dozen of these updates. But there will be a couple new things today. We'll be highlighting sort of how much is left with respect to IRA and BIL. And also we're gonna spotlight some new features that the IRA team has rolled out that shows how some of these investments are being placed on projects. And so we'll be leading off today with the Inflation Reduction Act team. Before we do that, let me just say we're going to be toggling back and forth between BIL and IRA because there are some overlapping milestones in the life cycle of the two appropriations. There's some overlapping between openings and closings of funding opportunities that we want you to be aware of. And we just want to proceed roughly chronologically to the extent we can in that. That said, I'm going to hand off to Kevin Sabo in our budget office to lead us through some of the slides on the Inflation Reduction Act. Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Matt, and hello, everybody else. We've had a ton of activity in our domestic water supply program since we met last quarter, and I'm very excited to discuss that with you. As you probably know, the Inflation Reduction Act provided Reclamation with $550 million to aid disadvantaged communities with the planning, design, or construction of water projects that will provide domestic water supplies to their residents. We are implementing that through 4 separate programs, which I will outline for you now. Next slide, please. Last year's round of Water Smart announcements included a funding opportunity for planning and project design, and a second opportunity for drought resiliency. From that, we announced last month almost $150 million in project selection, supporting 76 projects in 14 states. $82 million of that $150 million was funded through the IRA. A second planning and project design Water Smart funding opportunity closed last month, and we are reviewing those applications now. This represents the first domestic water supply money to be awarded from the IRA, and it's a great start. Second, we released a first of its kind funding opportunity to provide $11 million to 4 American territories that do not have reliable access to potable drinking water. Those announcements are open until late this summer, with project awards to be announced by the end of the year. You can find those on our website. Next slide, please. Speaking of first-of-a-kind programs, in April, the Department of the Interior announced that we are working with the Indian Health Service at the Department of Health and Human Services to jointly develop safe drinking water and community sanitation infrastructure projects across Indian country. Projects funded through this whole of government effort will be announced later this year. And again, we're very excited to work with our HHS partners in bringing relief and water, drinkable water, to Indian country. Finally, the great bulk of domestic water supply funds will be distributed through a tribal domestic water supply program that was announced in April. This program will provide up to 100% of the cost of planning, design, or construction of domestic water infrastructure to tribes in the 17 Western Reclamation states. We have set aside up to $320 million for this program, because we want to help our tribal partners gain access to this funding opportunity. Reclamation is hosting an instructional webinar next week on June 13th at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. You can find out more information on this webinar at our Native Affairs webpage. The link is right there on the screen, and I will add it to the chat at the conclusion of my remarks. If you are interested in this program, I strongly encourage you to have a representative in attendance on June 13th. With that, I'll ask for the next slide and introduce Sean Torpy, who will walk you through the IRA Canal Improvement Project. Good afternoon, Sean.
Afternoon, Kevin. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Sean Torpy in the Commissioner's Office and the co-lead for the implementation for the Inflation Reduction Act, along with Melissa Korber. I'm going to go through our Canal Improvement Project section 50232. I believe at our last quarterly we had awarded one project, and now we have 3 additional ones to highlight. As you all know, we had $25 million through September 30th, 2031 for the design, study, and implementation for these projects. Prior to this funding, Reclamation did not have a stake in anything to do with solar over canals. We'd had a lot of discussions with irrigation districts and partners about the possibility of doing this, but until the Inflation Reduction Act, we hadn't been involved. So we're excited that we were able to fund 4 great projects, and I'll highlight those here right now. If we can go to the next slide. As you all know from our last update in March, we had awarded to the Gila River Indian Community in Arizona $5.65 million in December of 2022 to install solar panels over their Casablanca Canal, which they are working diligently to get ready for service. The next slide, please. We had three more awards in April that we announced. One was the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority. It's their Delta Mendota Canal floating solar project in California for $15 million. And the next one was the North Unit Irrigation District project in Oregon in our Columbia Pacific Northwest region for $2.55 million. Both of those are floating solar over canals, and we're excited to see what comes of those 2 projects. The last one, our Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, they were awarded for solar panels over the Layton Canal project in Utah in our upper Colorado Basin. That award was for $1.5 million, and that was to cover existing canals with canal spanning solar panel structures in the upper portion of the Layton Canal. They'll be working on a demonstration of data collection and monitoring over the next 5 years, and we will anxiously await how that turns out. So these three selections, along with the Gila River Indian Community, exhausted the funding for project selections under Section 50232 of the Inflation Reduction Act. We can go to the next slide, please. So the next section, 50233, the drought mitigation and reclamation states. This is the $4 billion, the majority of our Inflation Reduction Act money. It's to remain available through September 30th, 2026. Obviously, the biggest portion of that funding, and in the next few slides and the next few presenters will dive deeper into the exact amounts that are associated with each of these buckets. But the majority of the money is for Colorado River drought mitigation. But we also, as you can see from our pie chart, have two other sections, the other basins funding for other basins experiencing comparable levels of drought, and Salton Sea. So with that, I will turn it over to Fernando Castro Alvarez, out of a water resources planner in our DC office, to talk about the Colorado River Basin funding.
Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you, Sean. My name is Fernando Castro Alvarez, and I'll be walking you through all the exciting investments that we've made thus far in the Colorado River out of this section of the IRA. In the lower basin for bucket 1, that's short-term conservation, that's achieved through 2026. And we have announced 24 agreements for that, totaling over 1.58 million acre-feet of system conservation in Lake Mead. That's water that remains in Lake Mead and supports our operations. The total cost is approximately $670 million. For bucket 2, today, our commissioner announced initial project selections. Bucket 2 is the long-term investments that are going to bring water for the system for at least a decade. And there's a news release associated with that, and I'll share that news release via the chat as soon as I'm done speaking here. The projects that have been selected will move forward to a negotiation stage. And once we have final awards, we will be announcing those individually. Next slide, please. As Sean mentioned, we're also investing in the Salton Sea. The declining lake levels there are contributing to water and air quality impacts to human health and wildlife, and the sea is expected to further recede. So in collaboration with the state of California, the Imperial Irrigation District, and the Coachella Valley Water District, we entered into an MOU that's funded by the IRA for up to $250 million to support projects for dust mitigation and also to support technical capacity building at the agencies for project implementation. So far, out of those $250 million, we've obligated $70 million for a project with the state of California that will create up to 7,000 acres of aquatic habitat. And we have also obligated $2 million for technical capacity building at the Torres Martinez tribe, contingent upon additional conservation agreements in California. An additional $178 million will be enabled. And the reason for having the system conservation tied to additional investment here is as more water is conserved, less water flows into the Salton Sea, accelerating the impact. So there's that connection there. Next slide, please. In the upper basin, we've said in the past that we're targeting $500 million between bucket 1 and bucket 2, equivalent to lower basin. Bucket 1 are short-term agreements. In this case, there are single-year agreements for system conservation. And bucket 2, those are long-term solutions. For bucket 1, we've executed a total of 174 agreements. Total investment is approximately $45.9 million for about 104,000 acre-feet of water. And for bucket 2, currently we're developing that funding opportunity. We're expecting 2 programs, one for water conservation and one for ecosystem restoration. And we expect the funding opportunity announcements to begin later this summer. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it to Melissa Smith from our budget office.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Melissa Korber, and I am the co-lead for IRA implementation along with Sean Torpy. And I get the pleasure of telling you about other basins, the long-awaited category of additional funding for basins outside of the Colorado River. In May, we were able to make our first announcements for other basins. And the first one on your screen is $60 million for Rio Grande. That one is going to happen through cooperative agreements with New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission and National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Reclamation, we will also work with the Elephant Butte Irrigation District, El Paso County Water Improvement District number 1, the International Boundary and Water Commission, along with all of the local stakeholders to develop supplemental water projects and programs to benefit the Rio Grande project and listed species in the basin. The projects and programs that they've actively put in the planning stages include storage at existing sediment dams and new off-channel storage to capture stormwater and use it to recharge the aquifer, reduce irrigation demands, and improve and create riparian wildlife habitat, irrigation infrastructure efficiency, and forbearance and fallowing. That's kind of a whole bundle of great efforts towards drought mitigation in the Rio Grande. That announcement was followed up by $81 million for what we're calling the South of Delta for Central Valley Project Drought Pool and in support of the San Joaquin Restoration Program. This includes creating water reliability and stability to support refuge programs, agriculture, industry, and the communities we serve, many of which are disadvantaged. In this bundle of $81 million, there were 3 projects included. One is for the Westlands Water District Aquifer Storage and Recovery Wells. The second one was for the Patterson Irrigation District East-West Conveyance Project. And the third was for the Los Baños Creek Detention Dam Project. All of those start to make up the drought plan, and the projects in that drought plan are going to reduce dry year water diversions from the Delta, providing critical water supply to CVPIA, South of Delta refuges, and protect the San Joaquin River Restoration Program in those driest years by carrying over water from wet 2 dry years. With those announcements, we will have subsequent announcements coming over the future months. We'll see another announcement at the end of June, more in July, and so on, until we are able to announce the full $500 million that we have set aside for other basins. Next slide, please. Also, in the Inflation Reduction Act, we have the Emergency Drought Relief for Tribes, Section 80004, with $12.5 million for tribes to mitigate near-term drought relief actions impacted by the operation of a Bureau of Reclamation water project. Next slide, please. Last December, to effect this legislation, we released a NOFO, a Notice of Funding Opportunity, to provide that assistance to eligible tribes. We are happy to say that that announcement closed in April, and we are now in the stage of selecting the recipients, with announcements hopefully coming in the fall. And that wraps up the discussion part of the individual sections of the IRA legislation. I am going to turn it over to Sean Torpy for the wrap up. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. This slide just kind of gives a summary of what was just talked about. Obviously, our $4.6 billion program We've announced 84 million in the domestic water supply, 25 million in the canal improvements, 1.2 billion in drought mitigation, and we'll be hopeful to announce the emergency relief for tribes later this fall. So looking at our pie chart, we've announced about a little over 30% of the 4.6 billion. So we have 60.6 still in progress, and hopefully will be announced over the next year. That leaves us with about 3.2 billion that will get us still be announced. Next slide, please. And exciting news, we've launched a reclamation dashboard for the Inflation Reduction Act. You can get to this dashboard through the website below. As Mary mentioned at the beginning, www.usbr.gov/Inflation Reduction Act. There is a link to the IRA dashboard there. As you can see, we've got a list of total projects and total funding announced, and then it's broken out by each individual section of the Inflation Reduction Act with projects and announced amounts as well. And we've got a nice map that shows each of the projects, where they're at, and you can find out more detailed information through that. It's a living website. We will do our best to keep it updated as much as possible. Just know that at times you may see different numbers, but we will be actively keeping this updated to ensure that it's as accurate as we can make it. And that is live now on our website. And I will turn it back over to Matt Mossieri to start with Bill.
Thanks, John. Okay, so we'll toggle back to BIL for the next couple of slides, and then I will hand off to my BIL co-lead, Beth Hughes Brown, who will bring us home for the last few slides before we go to questions and answers. So just a quick summary. These are numbers as of today. We've awarded about 537 projects, BIL funding. Those are numbers as of today, but they'll continue to change, especially that per projects, that number of projects there. Several of our projects have total costs that are above the $1 billion mark, particularly in dam safety, some of the water storage projects that we're funding, and our biggest single project, Navajo Gallup, a water supply project that benefits the Navajo and the Hickory Apache and the city of Gallup. It predates BIL, but it is moving forward with BIL funding. What this slide is meant to sort of get across is that it's been decades, probably since about the middle of the last century, since Reclamation had this much financial assistance and construction activity happening underway at one time. There's dozens of other projects going on besides those ones that I just alluded to. You saw some of them on Sean's map, and you can look at that map on our website. But we'll also show our BIL map in a second. If we go to the next slide, this is, we're not trying to overwhelm you, but we want to keep everyone engaged on BIL implementation, because it is the projects that these programs fund with local support that have always been sort of the backbone of the reclamation program. This slide shows some open funding opportunities. If you add those up, that's well over $800 million in open funding opportunities right now. And in order to get that funding put onto credible projects, we need to continue your engagement with us as we move this funding out. And that's in the form of funding opportunity announcements, as well as the internally administered programs like our Aging Infrastructure Program that works really closely with our Transfer Works operating partners and our project beneficiaries, runs out of our area offices. So thank you for being on this call. Thank you for engaging with us on BIL and IRA. Your engagement is what helps make it work. So the next slide, more overall sort of general points about BIL. I won't read through them, but just to put some context on them, and we'll post the slides on our website. Context for this stuff is, as you guys all know, being on the front lines of water and power missions for your communities, droughts are not going to go away. In fact, they'll probably get worse. And what will make their impact less is your participation and your community's participation, your districts, your organization's participation in these funding opportunities that you see here and on the prior slides, generating the kind of resilience that you know can happen when programs and projects like this are implemented. And that's why Congress enacted these programs, and that's what we want to do with them. There's, a couple nuances that are new to the last few years. With all this money, we've been doing things a little bit differently in terms of implementing more than one authority sometimes on a funding opportunity, and implementing multiple funding cycles on the same notice of funding opportunity, where you'll see, this first section is a deadline of X, and then there's another round, deadline of Y, another round, sometimes 3 rounds, deadline of Z. We think that is helpful to the applicant community, lets them plan and allocate their work time and resources a little bit better. But we're going to keep doing that, and we're going to keep on having the announcements post. There will be more coming in June and throughout the rest of calendar 2024. With that, I will hand off to Beth Hughes Brown to bring us home.
Hi there. Thank you, Matt. So midpoint, here we are at the midpoint. It is very exciting. We are halfway through. This is a 5-year appropriation. We get 1.66 billion per year. We've now gotten 3 years worth, and we are at halfway through that 3rd year. Thus, we are right at the midpoint. We've done 2 quarters. I'm going to go ahead and round. In the current fiscal year, we have halfway to go. So what have we done? We've done an awful lot, and we're delighted and honored to be part of this and to be contributors to this. So we've already done, the 6.64 billion has been allocated in spend plans. That does include the next fiscal year. We don't actually get hold of that money until midnight on September 30th. That's when it's actually appropriated, but we have already made plans for some of it. There are 5 spend plans on our website. You can go look at them. What we did in the beginning with those spend plans was we allocated them based on our what we call capability, what we could use in that fiscal year. Thus, the programs that were all ready to go, we used more in the beginning because they were all ready to go. And the brand new programs, they delayed for a while. Currently, what we're doing is when we can use it, we continue to use it. So, for example, you'll see that in some programs we could use more in this fiscal year. Thus, the spend plan has been adjusted a little bit to say, let's use this money now. We still have to obey all of the ceilings that are in the BIL, and there are lots of them. So we're very careful about that. But that doesn't mean we can't move it around because we want to get it out the door. One of my favorite phrases. We'll talk more about what get it out the door means to us in a minute. So it's very exciting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that halfway point in just a second. Next slide, please. So 4.1 billion distributed at the project level. There's a spend plan addendum that shows what the selected amounts are and to what recipients. So when we do a spend plan, it's at the program level. When we do an addendum, that's when we move it down to the actual recipients, the project level. There's an addendum on our website that covers 9 different actions in the 2nd quarter of this fiscal year. Ann Lewis-Williams, who's on this call, did the draft of that. It's quite masterful. But it does move stuff to where it needs to be shown. The requirement is that we show it all, which is what we're planning on doing and what we have done. There's a lot that went in there. As I said, 9 different programs. And then more stuff happened. Lots and lots of more stuff happened. April, originally, we were calling it $1 billion April. Well, that's changed because things took a little longer. Now it's $1 billion May. We're in the extraordinary circumstance of having essentially announced over $1 billion in this particular month in May, just for BIL, and about another $500 million for IRA. So things sometimes happen like that. You go for a while and you don't have the big announcements. Well, we do now, and lots of them, and it's very exciting. Next slide, please. So this is what's coming up soon. These are the announcements that have not yet made it into an addendum, but they are the announcements that we've made recently. So aging infrastructure, 520 million. I mentioned that in the spend plan, sometimes you have a different amount, but you can't use it all. So you move the money around a little bit. We had over 600 million allocated to be spent in the current year spend plan, but we spent 520 of that. Thus, that money will go to the next cycle. And in this particular fiscal year, we may use that balance for a different purpose. That's how we get it. Again, I keep on talking about what out the door means. Out the door means we're getting it into the hands of the people who need it. Storage and conveyance, $242 million. And that's obviously quite huge, just happened recently. Large scale water recycling, a new program that we just allocated 180 million on. Desalination, recycling, WUMP, Cooperative Watershed Management Program, and rural water are all coming up during June and July. All of that is on usbr.gov.bil. We are, one of the things that we take the responsibility of very strongly is keeping you informed. So you'll see it's all there. We make sure that everything we're doing, you see as close to the moment it happens as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so where are the BIL projects? If you remember our drought maps that you've seen many times, when you know where the droughts are, you see that's where the projects are. And so there's, bunches of them where we have the current droughts, the ongoing droughts, and so on. But you'll also notice that there's a fair amount in the areas where it's rural and there isn't a condensed number of people, for example. So we're blessed to be able to be part of that rural water and other things like that. We've not been able to fund. There's not enough people to warrant spending that much money until BIL. It's a really important mission, and we're very, very happy to be part of that. Next slide, please. A word on obligations. Obligations is a different concept. Obligations is something where it's a legal term where when you sign a contract, you are obligated by law to do what you need to do for that. And so that's one step in getting the money out the door. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But 1.9 billion has been obligated. That means legally it's already expended. So it is a definite commitment that creates a legal liability on the government for payment of goods and services. Very big deal. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is an obligation? Obligation is that contract, is that signed financial assistance agreement. It's having a person work for you. You're obligating someone's salary when they work for you. Those are obligations. Before that, we announce them. We select them. They are announced. That's part of what we do on our webpage. So the selection that predates the obligation. Then, after something is obligated, you do a contract. Then you have to sign a check, get it to the people who did the work for you. You have to expend it. That's the last stage. So when you commit something, by the way, I forgot that one. After you have announced it, after you have selected it, you're going to set up the money to be reserved for that purpose. And so that's called commitments. You put the money in the system and say this is committed for that purpose. Don't touch it. And then you obligate it using that money that you have committed, and then you expend it and get it out the door. So all of those requirements are the part of the process, getting money from when you've made a selection to when you get it out the door. Now, what happens after it's selected but before it's obligated? Lots. There are lots of requirements of law for financial assistance agreements and for contracts that we have to follow, and we do. A lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of legal requirements. Each one has to be evaluated for sufficiency. Each one has to be evaluated in many different ways. There are requirements. We do follow them. Is that onerous? Yes. Is it required? Yes. Is it good for the taxpayer? Because the taxpayer is putting money into the treasury, and they want to know that you're doing what you do honestly, truthfully, according to the law, and that they can rely on us to do the work the way it is supposed to be done by law. Next slide, please. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Beth. And yep, last slide, just wanted to say thanks again for being part of today. And for those of you who've dialed into previous of these information sessions, thanks for your continued to follow the Reclamation program. Our Director of Communications, Rob Manning, has a saying. He says, when you have a good team, take a picture. He takes a lot of pictures, but what I take from that is, he's mindful of the uniqueness of the moment. And similarly, we're in a pretty unique moment in the Reclamation program in its role in Western water, making a lot of these investments in such a short amount of time. So please keep being part of that moment, keep on applying or participating in funding opportunities, keep helping us move BIL and IRA forward so that it can get the more secure water future that the investments are meant to do for your communities and for our whole country. That's it. Thanks. I'll hand back to Mary Carlson, and we will see if we can cover any Q&As.
Sounds good. Thank you, Matt. We are extremely proud of what we've been accomplishing through Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, as you can see from those presentations. And now we're ready for your questions. So if I can just ask you to, if you have a question, to please use the little hand raise icon at the top of the screen, and we will call on you and try to unmute you and get you on the mic so we can hear your question.
Looks like there's 3 in the chat.
Okay, well, we will go to the chat if nobody's asking questions on here. So let's see. Let me get there. Is it possible to get links to the open NOFO for bill funding? So do we have the links to put in this chat, or can we get those? I'm not sure which
problem.
NOFO.
Yeah, all of our funding opportunities, they post on grants.gov, but we do link to them from our WaterSmart program. WaterSmart is sort of the law of averages. They have the largest number of funding opportunities. So if you look at that web link there, that third bullet, if you go to WaterSmart, you'll see on the right-hand side the links that'll take you to grants.gov, and the NOFOs are online there.
Okay, and looks like I missed one a little further up. So Raquel Flinker is asking, regarding the Upper Colorado River Basin IRA Bucket 2, is there a better idea of when in the summer the funding opportunity will be announced?
Sure, I can take that. We're working really hard with our partners on that. We know it's an important one that many folks are tracking. We are hoping to get it out as early as late this month. Obviously, that could move a little bit, but it's coming, I promise, and hopefully it will be well received with your applications.
Okay, and a question from Robert Greger. Do you anticipate any additional NOFOs for early stage desalination projects? Pitch to pilot type stuff. Who would be our technical person there?
Those are funded outside of BIL, but it is an ongoing pre-existing program. So we will be implementing that as we do with the annual cycles that we've been on, yes.
And again, the Water Smart page is a good place to go for that. Is that correct, Matt?
That's actually through our research and development team, not Water Smart.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
We can put the link to that page in the chat as well. We'll do that.
Thank you, Sherry.
Okay, and someone did ask for the links to the previous recordings to these meetings, and Chelsea has provided them. Or she provided the link to the page where all of them are posted, and the meetings today, the meeting this morning, and this meeting will be posted there either later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. I think Drew was already working on that when I spoke with him earlier today, so pretty soon. I don't see any other questions, but I will give you just a second and remind you that if a question comes up later on, or maybe you're going back through the presentation and you realize something, you can always submit questions by email to usbr.bil@usbr.gov or usbr.ir.act@usbr.gov. And believe it or not, the same people check both of those. So if you can remember one of the email addresses, I promise we'll get your question to the right person and make sure we get it answered. I think
There.
that, yes.
Two more questions
Oh.
in the chat.
Good. Thank you for pointing those out because I'm toggling between multiple screens here and I can't always see what's going on. So is there a list of projects selected for this announcement available? Fernando, do you want to take that one? I assume that's the link you posted in the chat.
Yes, Mary, of course. There's not a list of projects at this time. We're in coordination with all of those that submitted proposals to us for further discussions. Once we go through the agreement negotiation with all of those parties, we will be announcing those on an individual basis, and they will become available for you to look at. So stay tuned as we work with our partners on each of those. Thank you.
Okay, and we have a question about aquatic ecosystems. Do you know when the next round of aquatic ecosystem funding is anticipated to open?
We are anticipating that next opening is going to be in July of 2024, so this summer.
Okay, last call.
That is Sherry Looper who is speaking. She's one of our team. We're very proud of her. Thank you, Sherry.
Okay, I think that wraps up all of our questions. Again, you can always submit those by email if they come up later. Thank you again to all of our presenters. We appreciate all the information. Again, on behalf of the Bureau of Reclamation, thank you for attending today's information session. We are dedicated to transparently implementing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you soon. Bye.